in educational technology. I work for an ed tech company. I did teach for about 20, well, I was in the education sector for about 20 years, public and private education, and now work for an ed tech company where I train teachers on how to use the software platform that I work for.
Keeping on the BOE train, Jen?
Hi, Michael. I'm Jennifer Grega. This is my first term on the Board of Education. I am a more than 20-year government employee. I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I've also liaisoned with DOD where I lived overseas. I work on quality review specialization and most recently the PACT Act legislation dealing with the toxicity of different particulate matter, and Gulf War hazards, Agent Orange, all of that lovely stuff. I also work in quality from coast to coast for all 56 offices in all 50 states and also the territory of Puerto Rico, as well as doing training for all of those offices as well.
So nice to meet you.
And then Jim.
Hey guys, I apologize for my camera. I'm eating lunch now, which I don't think anybody wants to see, so my apologies. But I am the Director of Student Services at Perry Schools. I have the special education, the preschool, nursing, social work, a variety of different departments that I oversee. This is my 20 plus year in education, maybe 22, 21. So yeah, I've been with Perry for the last about 10 years as well.
And now we'll jump over to our council members. So Brian.
Hi guys, Brian Farley. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it was delayed. Yeah. Sorry.
All right. Sorry. I'm Brian Farley. I'm a Perry Village Council member. I've been doing this about 5 months. Professionally, I'm a registered nurse with the Cleveland Clinic. I've been worked for pretty much every major hospital system in Cleveland throughout the last 10 years or so. I have a bachelor's degree in nursing, and that's pretty much it. Excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Nice to meet you.
And last but certainly not least on our side, Elias.
Yes, my name's Elias Koss. I'm actually the sitting mayor in Perry Village. I've been on council for 6 years, and I own a flooring business. I am very interested in hearing what you have to share and say to us today. I will tell you, like I've told everybody else from day one, I'm 50-50 on this complete project. So I'm open to hear, but I'll be very transparent, very candid. I respect your profession and your education. But as I told Maria, I'm pretty confident that there's going to be other doctors and scientists and specialists that are going to counter. So at this point, I'm in just input-taking mode.
Totally.
But completely open-minded, open ears, and I'm just as transparent as they come, so I shoot it straight.
Nice. Well, it's nice to meet you. I'm happy to give an intro to myself. So I'm Michael Cork. I am a environmental health scientist at Harvard, Trans School of Public Health. I did my PhD at Harvard. I did my master's in public health at the University of Washington. And my research really focused on understanding how we can translate the increases in pollution to health impacts. That's kind of what I did my PhD on. Over the past year and a half, I've gotten increasingly interested in understanding how the impacts of data center infrastructure might impact community health. And so this is something I've kind of started a consulting business with Dr. Francesco Dominici, who's been a professor at Harvard for 30 years and kind of an expert in air pollution. And we're really interested in making sure that health costs and the impact of health is something that's considered and part of the decision-making process for community members, for developers, for regulators, to ensure that economic growth is kind of in lockstep with community health. And so I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about, I know Maria gave me a little bit of background, but kind of what kind of the questions that you are thinking about with this development. And then I'm happy to share some of the work we've done, some of the questions we ask, and why I think, what we can provide that I think is helpful for decision makers and kind of towns or communities that are thinking about, hey, what are the questions I should be asking and how should I approach, this consideration of data center infrastructure? Maria, I think it'd be helpful just to kind of remind me of like the project itself, and it also might be helpful for me because it sounds like you all have talked about like what you're hoping to get from this conversation, because I have a lot of things I could share, but I want to make sure it's kind of the most useful to you all.
Yeah, so I'll be really transparent with what I would like to see.
Yeah.
What I would like to see is some independent science on just exactly what you do, Michael. I have a lot of concerns. I've been around the manufacturing side of things, and these are like hyperscale manufacturing sites in terms of air pollution that I've been able to research, and so like it's concerning to me as a citizen that this is going in my backyard. And so my challenge and my challenge to Elias, and Brian's been roped into this, is how do we ensure that science is done and that we understand the community health impact. I understand that for every perspective of one way, you're going to have other people who say something different, and so you might not be necessarily the only resource that the council needs in order to make a decision, but we need to start somewhere. So that's my goal, is you are starting somewhere. I would like to see a proposal out of this meeting of what would it look like for you to provide those services, to map out, and what type of information would you need. And then also from Brian and Elias's standpoint, what are the gaps? To my knowledge, a site plan hasn't been submitted by Province Group to the county for this for this data center. So there's a lot of hypotheticals in terms of what it actually is and what it is not. The community page is alive with all of the things that could possibly be. So, but there's not a lot of facts with a site plan that comes with a site plan. So that is personally my goal. I know I've spoken with Elias, and there is one thing we do align on is we do need information on the community health impact. Now, how many sources and who are the sources? Like those are things, the details we haven't yet aligned on. We haven't aligned on how we do that. So like the budget side of things. And then I invited the school board here because this is I didn't invite the entire school board. I invited the wellness board and Jim. So they're on the wellness committee. I have 2 kids in the school system that are immunocompromised, have lots of different things going on, and so call me a little. I'm heightened to the sensitivities that they would experience as a student population with this going in across the street from the schools with the air that they would be breathing. And so that I did my research, I came across your work, and I was like, this is exactly what we need. This is the type of information that really we need to have in order to be making some sound decisions with independent data. And that's personally what I would like to see out of it. But I don't want to speak for the board, and I don't want to speak for the village. So if they have different views on what they would want to take out of this, I invite them to speak up as well.
I was going to say, while Maria's talking about the school impact, because it is so close to the school, and as a community, we should be putting our youngest residents first. I would like to hear your discussion on, the cognitive effects. the environmental changes that these students of all levels, because we go pre-K through 12, within walking distance to where this is. And most people talk about how our community does. They walk, they bike around, the kids are around all the time. It's not like they stay in their houses and they kind of shelter. That doesn't happen. Our community is very community focused and they're out and about. So the cognitive effects, those environmental changes that many of us do realize are going to happen, and what we look at, like Maria said, not just with children, with children that have medical conditions, because those are things that can affect all of them, but then also those long-term possibility of learning issues because of the change of the environment, because of the environmental hazards or, change in chemical composition. And then even taking it a step further, looking at that learning interface and how we try to operate in it. Because trying to go against that without the knowledge up front is not serving any of our kids. And I'm sorry, that was Jen.
I'll actually kind of piggyback off of Maria. So before I actually even go any further in this, I need to ask this question. This is all being recorded, correct?
I will record Elias if we want to. I didn't want to proactively record anything without express permission. I can't record it in the meeting, but I can record it on my phone, so at least we have the audio transcript.
Yeah, okay, no, and that's fine. I would like for this to be recorded because, again, I have made a lot of decisions over the past several weeks with building that relationship with the community, the school board, the other entities, to show transparency. And so I want to kind of continue that, and I also kind of want to share this meeting with the rest of my peers on council here, as well as the other entities, if they so choose to listen or to listen over it. So I just want to make sure that it's being recorded in any form or fashion. So let me kind of piggyback off of what Maria was saying. And I'm just going to steal a line from one of the many conversations that she and I have. So I'm looking at this as it stands right now. My biggest concerns, I think this is where Maria and I align, as well as, and I won't speak for Brian, but I think Brian would echo these statements. One of the big concerns is the medical, the health and wellness of data centers. There's many different types of data centers. Some are better or safer than the others and stuff like that, right? And so at the end of the day, none of us are data center gurus, and neither are the, so-called data center experts that all of a sudden magically appeared over the past few months on Facebook community pages. So my concerns are the health and wellness side of it, right? Like the economics and stuff like that, I can negotiate us through it, and if we were able to check those boxes off for me personally, I would then work on the number side of it, because in full transparency, again, I'm not happy with what was presented to us from a financial standpoint either. That being said, to still align from one of the many conversations that Maria and I have had, is whether this data center is right behind the building that I'm sitting in right now, or potentially 1/4 of a mile north of where it's at. Pollution has no borders, right? And so I keep hearing this is right in the backyard, so right across the street from the high school or the schools and blah, blah, blah. And that's all very valid. But there is pretty strong rumors that whether this one comes here or not, there's one getting built. There is one getting built in North Perry, which is literally a half a mile, if that, north of where this one's being built at. So if we're going to be fair, right, then whether it's a half a mile north or not, pollution has no boundaries, right? And I think we could all agree to that. And so that's where I'm interested in hearing about, because if my boxes are not checked off, and I'm not okay with what I'm hearing when this is all said and done from the medical side of it, and this was to go away, then you best believe I'm in full force on getting it dismissed in any other area around us. And so I want to just make that very clear. I'm not here just to listen to the one being built potentially behind us. I would be on, if my boxes are not checked, I'm looking to put a kibosh on anything anywhere close to my residents.
Yeah.
And Mike,
Well,
I
this is
guess
all-
just to clarify, so we within our community of Perry, we have 3 government agencies. So there's Perry Township, there's Perry Village, and then there's North Perry, which operates as a JED. So when Elias says like North Perry, it truly has its own like different governing body than what Elias and Brian represent, which is the village. So just for your awareness of how our community is set up.
And then the schools branch all of those. So they
Yes.
cover all 3 Perrys. And so we truly are in it for all of the 3 Perrys. Not that everybody isn't, because all of us live in one of the 3, all of us separately in different parts of Perry. But we represent like that collective school that represents all 3 Perrys. And for me, I would just like to hear, because it is so new and there's so much information flying around out there. One of the concerns I have is, along with the environmental impact and everything else everybody else has brought up, are things like the constant noise being not close to the school, potential ground vibrations, some of those other things that can come about that I want to hear about. What are the impacts on our kids? And to Elias's point, and not that our students or our community is for sale, but there's definitely a balance between what are the financial implications as opposed to the health and the wellness, which I would say that the latter is definitely the most important.
Yeah, and so just to kind of add one more thing, after the presentation that we had a week and a half ago, I met with a resident, and Brian was actually in that discussion with one of the residents, and I was specifically asked, "What's my number?" And I asked, "Well, what do you mean, what's my number?" And he goes, "What's your number? What's the number that they would have to give to you for you to say I'm signing off on this?" And I looked at him. I go, "There isn't one." And he's like, "Well, what do you mean there isn't one?" And I go, "My biggest concerns of this is the health and wellness of my residents, right? And there is no number." Right? If I can't get checked off that the residents of my community, not just the village, but Perry as a whole, right? As a whole, if I can't get that checked off for me, there is no number. Period. And so again, that's why I entertained this. I am interested. I am interested to listen to some other people, right? Because there's going to be other sides to the argument as well. And then the biggest part about this, to kind of piggyback what Maria was also saying, was although there's 3 entities, so the village itself owns 2/3 of the land that this is going to go in. So it's like 230 acres, and we own 2/3 of the land of it. The reality is that this project could continue even if the township and the JED decided to back out, right? The Providence Group it's still very much interested in moving forward with the project as long if the village was the only entity that went into it. That being said, whether you're a township resident, a North Perry resident, a Perry Village resident, or an East Lake resident, the health of human beings, regardless of age, gender, is what's important to me. And so that's why I'm entertaining listening to what you have to say. So on that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all that context. And I also just want to, I think you should all be really proud of yourselves for, and like really doing your homework and thinking about this is a complex issue, right? And there's a lot of important considerations to be put, and I can tell that you all take this very seriously, and are putting a lot of thought behind this investment and whether or not this is what you want for your community, and that's hard, especially when the money's involved and when decisions are moving fast. So I maybe just want to start there and say it's really cool that you guys are doing this, and I can tell you really care about your community and the people's well-being. So I think what might be helpful is I can give a little overview of what we do and kind of like an overview of how I think about the health impacts of data centers. I have some slides I can share. I can walk through one little case study, and then I can present why I think this information can be useful to you all. And then from there, maybe we can have some questions and follow up. And, there's certain questions I have of you because, there's certain, I think Elias said this well of like, not all data centers are built the same in terms of their impacts on health. One of the biggest factors is like how and where is this energy coming from, right? Because data centers use a ton of energy. And so I'll go through that a little bit. But I have some also ideas and suggestions about like, what are kind of a good ways to think about this. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to do, can you all see just the slides?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to speak to the slides. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. For whatever reason, I cannot see you as I'm presenting this, so I'm just going to go ahead and present. But so I want to present a little bit about data centers, and this is like from my experience as an environmental health scientist and also as part of this consulting group where we work with different communities and other players. So one thing I like to do is like give a little background on like how I think about what a data center is. The reality is a lot of us are interacting with these AI tools in different ways. But I think a lot of what gets lost sometimes is understanding how this computation happens, right? A lot of us might have an app on our phone, we use ChatGPT, we ask it a question, maybe let me draft a text to my friend, and what ends up happening is right, we type this in our phone and we get an answer to our phone, but this is not happening on our phones, right? So every computation that we do when we ask AI a question, it's almost like we're mailing it to a location, a data center, where there's tons of computers and servers that are able to answer that question, give us the answer, and send it back to us. And I think that's an important context to understand what a data center is, because it is the physical representation of how we're building this digital world. And this physical representation has real impacts on the earth and the communities because these facilities are running 24/7 and they can consume large amounts of energy to do it. So I like to start with this because I think it's helpful. I think there's a reason that we sometimes don't associate all the kind of work that we do on the digital world with a physical representation. But as you all are aware of now, like data centers are the way that we can support that. I kind of hinted at this, but one of the really important considerations about data centers is how we are powering them. These facilities often require a lot of power. And what's happening right now is that the grid, which is like, the way that we are often connected to electricity, is running out of resources. So there's a lot of a growing trend to developers to build their own fossil fuel turbines or diesel generators on site. And that's kind of how they generate power. The reality is that when we talk about health impacts, right, it's really important to consider how are we thinking about generating that power? Because if you are going to use a fossil fuel turbine, we know that this has impacts on the environment, and actually the science is pretty clear on understanding how those impacts might impact your community. So I like to give a little bit of a kind of a brief overview of one particular type of pollution that I think is really important, and this is fine particulate matter. This form of pollution is important because it's estimated that 90% of the health impacts of air pollution come from this type of pollution. And what this fine particulate matter, or PM2.5, which sounds really technical, is it actually just refers to pollution of a certain size. It refers to really small particles that are about 30 times smaller than the width of a human hair. And the reason that these are dangerous is because they're small enough to penetrate deep into the lungs, and they can even enter the bloodstream. And so they're associated with a whole host of adverse health outcomes, some of which I'm going to list here. So the science on this is really robust and well developed, linking increases in pollution to things like childhood asthma, heart attack, stroke, lung disease, and premature death. And there are two things I like to emphasize about this type of pollution. One is that this is a form of pollution that it is not just going to be generated from data centers. There's a lot of levels of background PM2.5 pollution that we breathe in every day. This comes from combustion, like the airline industry, cars, certain forms of dust. So there's a lot of background air pollution. But what is also clear is that every time we are increasing the amount of this pollution that we are exposed to, that leads to an increase in risk of these health impacts. So while at the federal level, we set a federal limit of how much we consider acceptable. And this is actually 9 micrograms per meter cubed, which is just a measure of concentration. Even though we set this federal limit, we know that from the science that even if you're below that limit, that doesn't mean that an increase isn't going to have an impact on health, right? So any increase in pollution is going to translate in increased risk of health. So when you're thinking about kind of trade-offs, it's considering, okay, what level of risk do we find acceptable in a community? That's a little background on fine particulate matter. I want to talk a little bit about how we use this information to estimate health. So I did my entire PhD on understanding this form of pollution. And what we do is when you're thinking about or being approached by a data center facility, we want to understand, one, how much pollution is going to leave the plant. 2, we want to model how that pollution spreads across space. So, right, I think is brought up really smart, right? Pollution does not respect any sort of borders, right? And pollution can travel far from its source. We actually have really well documented science to try to understand how this pollution will spread across the population and understand how this translates into an increase in the pollution that we might breathe in certain areas. We also want to understand, based on where the pollution is going to travel, who is going to be exposed, right? Who are the people that are going to be bearing the brunt of this added health risk? And then we also want to quantify that health risk. What we do at Empower Analytics Group is we use an EPA model, which is designed to evaluate the question or give an estimate of what would the health damages be of an increase in pollution in this certain area. And so this allows us to give some sort of quantification of what the health impacts would be from air pollution. I want to talk about one, I think it's helpful to maybe go into one example. And I'm going to look at one example in Northern Virginia that we did. And what I'm showing here, I'm going to start with, there's a lot going on. So I'm going to start at the top right. So on the top right, you can see a little inset of the eastern US to kind of give context of where we're looking at. So we're looking at Northern Virginia, but we also have Washington, D.C. and Maryland. The star here is the location of this data center. This data center is around 250 megawatts, and it is using on-site power. So it's using a fossil fuel combustion turbine running 24/7 to power this data center. It was one of the first using on-site power generation in Virginia. You can see that it's located in a dense area. What I'm showing here is a bunch of different towns, and I'm coloring the towns based on the additional pollution that would be imposed from this plant. So the darker red means there's going to be more average pollution from this plant. So it's kind of intuitive in the sense that, right, the closer you get to this facility in general, the more pollution you're going to get. But we can see that because of underlying weather patterns, it actually travels eastward more than west. And you can see that this pollution kind of plume extends kind of far from this town into areas of DC and others. This like outline here, you're seeing where there's no pollution. That's actually the Dulles National Airport. So that's why it's kind of shown in this outline. And that's a map of the kind of exposure, but really we might be interested in saying, okay, how does it translate into health impacts? What we showed in this data center is that it would be linked to 3 to 7 additional premature deaths per year across the entire region. So this is not just in the town where it's built. It's valued at $53 to $99 million in annual health damages, and it would be kind of associated with 2,600 new cases of asthma symptoms annually. And in this setting, we also looked at how this kind of this data center overlaps with in this county. So this is Loudoun County, Virginia, which is the data center capital of the world. There's a huge build out of data centers here. How this data center interacts with environmental justice communities. Okay, so now I think I'm going to transition a little bit to what this information, how this could help you or communities or towns. And I think there's a couple of things that I can be helpful for. One is understanding the health risks or quantifying the health risk is important to understand the trade-offs and make sure that you are going into any decision clear-eyed. Because the reality is a lot of important concerns that you've brought up, right? Like noise pollution, there's water consumption, there's health impacts, there's ratepayer increases. The hard part is we're in an environment where there isn't a ton of data on this, and I think you are noticing this as a community, is this is something that is rapidly developing. And so what I think is really important is that we can only start making informed decisions that might mitigate some of these harms while maybe maximizing some of the benefit if we understand where we are. And so I think this can allow you to ask better questions to developers, like asking what are the total annual emissions that you think are going to be emitted from this plant? What assumptions are being used? Can we evaluate alternative scenarios, right? Can we look at lowering emission limits, using cleaner technology, maybe putting some limits on generator use? Thinking about that mix of using grid power, which generally is cleaner in the sense that it's going to rely on the energy mix of the grid, versus if you have an on-site generator and if you have a power plant next to it, we know that that's going to be emitting pollution, kind of 24/7. And generally, I think getting this information can help negotiate stronger terms, or at least have clear, independent scientific data that links this specific facility and project to health endpoints. So here's some examples of what I think communities can ask for, and to be really transparent, this is something that is quickly evolving. I mean, you find yourselves in a situation that a lot of communities across the U.S. are, which is grappling with understanding what are the right questions to ask and how do I go about this decision in an environment where really it's quickly changing and people are still trying to understand what these impacts might be. So some examples, right, again, is thinking about emission limits. One thing that if you leave this meeting kind of being, one thing I'd want you to really leave with is that when we think about health impacts through air pollution, which I think is a really important consideration to make, is the most important factor that's going to reduce the health burden is finding ways to reduce the amount of pollutant emitted, which sounds really straightforward and that makes sense, but there's a couple of different levers where you can try to think about this. And this is also something that, a developer should know about, right? Is thinking about, okay, if we're trying to maximize health, we're thinking about what are the measures that might reduce the total amount of pollution that leaves a facility. And there's a lot of different potential options, but I'm giving a couple here, right? Emission limits, limits on generator hours, cleaner technology, setbacks and siting considerations. There's also air quality and noise monitoring commitments. So committing to monitoring and understanding how operations of a facility might impact noise. And if it is above a certain threshold, to commit to certain, building noise walls or other ways to kind of try to reduce those impacts. Air quality monitors can be useful as well. One kind of thing to note about air quality monitors that I like to say is they're an important part of the picture, but they are not in themselves sufficient because, air monitors can tell you what the air quality is in one specific area, but they have a couple of drawbacks. One is that we want to understand how this pollution affects the entire kind of community, so not just at one area. The second question is the question of attribution. Air monitors are hard to say, this increase in pollution is due to a specific source, right? Especially when you have competing things like highways or wildfire season. It highlights why monitors can be helpful, but you also want to rely on something like a validated dispersion model, because that is trying to estimate, from a specific source what we know about how that pollution will change. These are a couple of examples of what communities ask for. So here's what some of the things that we do in Empower Analytics Group, and this is something that we're kind of continually evolving. The mission of this company really is to help inform decision making, and I believe that health is an important aspect of it. So there's kind of two options that we have of understanding it. One is much more comprehensive than the other, and this is a full health impact assessment. So what we do is we generate, looking at the specifics of this facility, understanding how much pollution is going to leave the plant, the turbine model, kind of all these specifics to produce a map similar to what we did for the Vantage data center of understanding where this pollution is going to travel, estimate health impacts, and we can even do some scenario modeling of saying, hey, if we change this specific thing, how might that impact health of the community? That is often a timeline of 1 to 2 months. It's kind of a lot of hours of manual work, and we've priced it at 30 to 50K. Now, the second option we've done is this rapid health impact memo, and this is a shorter commitment. What we're looking at is still understanding the health impacts, but it's going to be more at a order of magnitude health impact estimate. And what it does is it translates the amount of emissions that are going to leave a plant using an EPA model that is designed to give you a screening level estimate of how that translates into health. Now, for both of these type of reports, what we need is understanding how much kind of emissions are going to leave the plants, and often can be taken from an air permit or the facility specifications if available. This is working with kind of developers to see what data we have to really help inform that question. And what I just want to end with is something that I think you all seem really well aware of, and I'm actually really impressed with how you are approaching this, which is this commitment, like deciding on whether to bring in a data center is a long-term infrastructure decision that has the potential to affect, air quality and health for decades. And so it's a really important decision to go in clear-eyed and just understand all the trade-offs. And the second thing I like to emphasize is that we do have established science that has been peer-reviewed and really well documented to try to understand the health impacts. So these are things that are measurable, and I think that hopefully I convince you that it's at least a useful tool and information to have. And one thing that really drives my work is I think that understanding these health questions is super important to do at the point that where you're at, which is before a decision has been made, right? When you're thinking about it, it's super important to understand this so that you can make sure that you are understanding what you're agreeing to, and also to maybe give you more leverage or understanding when you're talking with the developer about how you both are kind of entering into this commitment together. So I'm going to stop there, and I would welcome any questions you all have. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Michael. I guess one of my questions then is the area of focus for you is largely on the air pollution side. Do you guys do anything on the noise side or the water side as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the basis of our work right now has been focused through air pollution because that is a really well documented scientific pipeline and also our area of expertise. For noise pollution, we do have some information we can share, but the kind of the scientific research on translating noise pollution to health impacts is a little bit less established. Mm-hmm. It is something that's really, I think, acutely felt by residents because air pollution isn't something that you can always see, or the impacts are accumulated over time, whereas noise, we've noticed, is something, right, that community members, it's kind of hard to ignore, right? It's something that's either in your face or not, and it's really tied to proximity to the facility. So we definitely have recommendations on that, but we have less of I would say a full scientific pipeline that's kind of talking about how noise might translate into health impacts. For water specifically, this is also something that's rapidly evolving. Water is a slightly more complex question because it depends on a lot of factors, and this is something that kind of outside of my hat as a consultant, this is something that people in my research lab are working hard on. At this point, we don't have as established of a recommendation around water because it's just such a rapidly evolving space, but it's something that we're trying to also get numbers on.
So I got a couple questions for you. My first question is when you're talking about the data center you guys were looking at in Virginia.
Yep.
You said, did I hear you right? You said you found that the pollution was gonna cause 3 to 7 premature deaths per year.
Mm-hmm.
What type of area? How many miles are you looking at when you guys came to that conclusion?
Yeah, so this is using that EPA tool, and what it does is it looks at where this pollution is going to leave this facility and in this county, and it maps a kind of distribution of how this increases the concentration of pollution across the regions. This is looking across the entire region that is affected, and so this includes areas of Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Maryland. Now, the majority of the effects are going to be felt close to the facility, but when I'm talking about 3 to 7 additional premature deaths, this is at a population level across the entire impacted area. So it is not restricted to, one community.
What year did you do that study? Was that recently or was that
That was this year.
this year? If a data center doesn't use any like on-site power, like you were talking about generators and like I know there's nuclear options, a lot of different things happening. But if a site doesn't actually use any of that, what do you find as far as emissions typically?
Yeah, so if there's a way for a facility to not burn fossil fuels on site, that's gonna mitigate a lot of the harms through air pollution. So yeah, that's I think the most important consideration I would say to communities is if you can reduce the amount of emissions that are leaving the plant, that's gonna do a lot for reducing the health effects, especially through air pollution.
Hey, Michael,
Michael,
have you
yeah.
seen have you seen data centers that have been able to not have on-site power generation? Like, do they exist in the world of things that you've worked on? And are they rare? Are they more common? Or is it growing? Like, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so generally, actually, the trend was to have these be connected to the grid, and that has some of its own considerations, right? Like, there's considerations about increases in the cost of electricity for ratepayers because of how we structure the grid. But in terms of pollution, right, that means we're not going to have, a power plant basically built next to the data center. It's relying on the infrastructure of the grid, which has its own energy mix, which is often a mix of renewables and also fossil fuels, but kind of the distribution of pollution is going to be like where these power plants are located throughout the region. One thing to consider, and actually I'm curious in your situation, is this going to be on-site power or not? On-site power is a growing trend because of how much energy these data centers consume, and basically we're running out of energy.
Yeah.
So the biggest consideration I have for health is using a grid-connected data center is going to be a lot better than on-site power. The grid data centers themselves do all have diesel backup generators that are supposedly only supposed to run in emergency situations. But, we're seeing also a growing trend in potentially using them and selling that kind of energy back to the grid in certain situations. So for the backup generators, that's a consideration. And I think proximity to schools and other things, I think is absolutely something to think about if you're using backup generators, because ideally you don't want to have these diesel backup generators running. And maybe, you can even talk to developers about like, if you have backup generators to be like, well, if you're testing them, you need to test them like not during school hours, or on a weekend. And I think these are the questions that health framing helps understand, because I think a lot of times developers are not, that's not the thing they're optimizing for, but there are definitely ways to try to reduce some of those harms.
Yeah, and I think for me, the concern is I mean, Province Group has made it pretty clear that they're not here for the long haul, right? They're developers. And so they are not going to be the ones using the facility. And so I think for Elias and Brian, like, there's considerations here of who are we actually, how do we ensure that what we agree to, or whatever agreements we get to with province also applies to whoever operates the facility as well, and making sure that translates moving forward.
Going back to that energy question, as far as how they cool the equipment, does that play into how much energy consumption? So thinking about water cooling as opposed to cooling the air, or any kind of solutions they may soak the equipment in to keep it cool. Does that contribute to the amount of power that is going to be produced, needed? And will that play into needing a backup generator or additional power if you're cooling the air as opposed to directly cooling the equipment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, this is something, what I've been seeing is that it definitely impacts how much power you're going to need. Generally, water cooling requires less power, but then your trade-off is it's going to require a lot more consumption of water, whereas air cooling in general is more power intensive, but you consume less water as a resource. So yeah, in terms of like how this translates into health impacts through air pollution, it depends on, okay, what is my power source, and am I generating that extra power by, burning a diesel turbine or a natural gas turbine, or this is coming from the grid. But yeah, I think those considerations definitely, it's a trade-off between energy and water consumption.
Elias, were you going to say something?
Yeah, to kind of piggyback also what Maria was saying, they're going to be the owners of the property, and the end users could be anybody. They have not disclosed that they have any. In fact, what they've said is that they don't have any end users confirmed at this point. So it could be anybody, right? And essentially they're leasing it out to them. I also happen to sit as the president of the fire board. And today I took yet another day off of work for my business to help go support them in a fire levy that we're trying to get passed here. And one of the things that I've learned over the course of the last several years as I sat on this board is the negative impact of the nuclear plant. So I don't know if anybody has told you, but literally we have a nuclear plant in North Perry. And so there's been conversations, not any of that I've been privy to, between Province and the nuclear plant, and they seem both to be pretty satisfied with generating the power and the energy that would be needed from that, right? And I haven't been given any specifics outside of the fact that both parties seem pretty happy with A, being able to do it, and B, what they're receiving on their end. But to go back to the fire board, and the whole end user in all of this is another one of my concerns. And we hired a law firm to kind of deal with the abatement and the pilot portion of this. And so I have zero communications with Province. Any communication I have is through the law firms. I have zero interest in talking directly with them. But one of the things, as a result of what I've learned as sitting on the fire board, is the long-term effect from a financial standpoint of it, right? And so to Maria's point, everything could look gravy, and we could check off all the boxes, right, initially, and say go, but what looks good today may not look good 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And so learning from what I've learned dealing with the fire board and the nuclear plant, that is another issue aside from you and this conversation that I'm working through as well. Making sure that we have language in there that takes care of all the entities, Perry as a whole, if this looks different 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And a perfect example is, right, data centers didn't come up just yesterday or even 5 years ago, but data centers 20 years ago look very different today. So and this is just, again, be transparent. Maybe I'm saying more than I should, but, everything could look great today, but in 8 to 10 years, is it different, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of layers to this, and so it's not. I try to tell people without trying not to beat the dead horse here is, I think Brian will piggyback. I'm not in any situation where I feel like I need to race to the finish line at this point, right? They've been given ample of time to do their due diligence, and I'm at the point to say, like, fuck it. I'm taking my time as well to make sure that we do our due diligence before I agree to anything. And again, I'm only one vote, but I'm not here to race to the finish line for anybody. At the end of the day, my concern are the people that live in my community and the surrounding areas, whether this comes here or doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's a really smart way to frame it too, is this is something that is worth really taking your time and thinking about. And I think you're totally right. I mean, there's a lot of speculation and concerns that, right, as technology changes, right, is data center structure going to change? So I think these are all, and maybe just to kind of validate your perspective on this is what I'm seeing as well, is it's something to really, you don't need to rush into, and to understand all the angles and sides of it will only help make an informed decision.
Can I ask you one last question, Michael?
Sure.
So with my work, I deal with, like I said, I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I have been dealing with the PACT Act since before it actually got passed in 2022.
we deal with small particulate matter when we're looking at things like Afghanistan, Bahrain, Qatar, anywhere in Southwest Asia. But we look at it from the adult perspective. So what my question has been, when we look at it in veteran population and what I do in my research, we've seen the behavioral changes, the confusion, the anger issues, as well as the physical ramifications, right? The asthma, the sinusitis, the rhinitis, the different cancers, respiratory cancers, even stomach cancers, which the VA is still fighting, but it's still in there. Sleep apnea. I mean, so many things. What my data doesn't have, though, is I'm looking for that for younger, because obviously to enlist in the services, you have to be 18. So my population that I'm pulling my data and what I'm working with are 18 and above. Is there anywhere you could point me that would give me information on who I have taken the duty to protect on our school board, which is, again, pre-K through 12?
Yeah. That's a great point. So the way that we run our analysis, right, using this kind of EPA framework is there's a bunch of different health endpoints that it links to. And each health endpoint is informed by scientific studies that link, sometimes millions of Americans and follow them over time and see like how much pollution they're exposed to and how this changes. This links to things like premature mortality and others. And these studies are really rigorous and kind of been replicated over time enough that the EPA actually uses kind of causal language to talk about particulate matter around. We know that this has health impacts, and I like to compare it a little bit to smoking, which is that we know smoking is bad for you, but we know that it accumulates over time. We know that secondhand smoke is bad for you, but it's hard to like point to a specific instance where we say, oh, that cigarette there was the reason that you got lung cancer, but we know it just increases the risk of these diseases, and we can prove this using science. So there's some health endpoints related to younger children, and we know kind of infant mortality is one that's kind of connected in this kind of the COBRA study. I can look at others that link to it. Usually, a lot of this work is limited by the science that we can conduct, and generally, it's a little harder to work with childhood data. So you'll see that we have a lot of data on age 65 and up, and that's because we have access to Medicare data. Our lab actually has access to the entire Medicare data of the United States, which from a scientific perspective is super helpful because it's all Americans 65 and up. So from a completeness standpoint, we can say a lot of things. So that's a really great question, and I can look into more, but I know there are some health endpoints like infant mortality. Like, I think there's also like asthma symptoms, which is like an asthma, developing asthma, which is like in younger kids, I think is up to 16. So there are some that are included.
Thank you, because that's where I've been running into most of the data studies start obviously when you can sign consent and above, which unfortunately doesn't deal with the population that I have the duty to protect. So I appreciate that. If you happen to come across them or you see something, or if I do, I'll send it through Maria. But I do appreciate you taking your time to talk to us today.
Of course.
And in addition to that, Jen, just piggybacking off of that, children are growing and changing a lot faster than older adults. And, you look at cancer studies, cancer usually doesn't progress as fast in elderly patients because they aren't generating as quickly as younger children. So it would be definitely very interesting to see the difference on the different population of people.
Yeah, and if I can ask, I guess on that end, this is going to sound really silly. Is there actually like a right way to go about building these? Like, we go through this process and you can deliver the analytics. Is there something these gentlemen would be able to take back to the developers and actually say, this is what we would want to see in the event that this goes forward, because this is what's known by science to actually make this, safe and attainable, to its resources? Are there actual solutions that, we can work, or they can work even with developers on ensuring are in place, or is it sort of a lose-lose?
I want to be mindful of time because I know we're about to be cut off potentially, but yes, I think there's a lot of scenario planning. Again, it's really tied to if there's scenarios where we reduce the amount of emissions, we can help quantify what that would look like, right? We can say, hey, this would save at a regional level this amount of money in terms of health damages. So, it's all, everything has assumptions, but you definitely have a lot of levers that you can pull. And what I think this gives you is leverage to say, hey, we have independent science showing this is going to impact my health. So I'm going to ask for what do you think is available to you as a developer, and here's what we think is available to maybe try to mitigate some of those harms. So I think absolutely, if I'm doing my job right, you should have options that you have. I mean, you have a lot of power, right? Like, you're giving them a resource and they are investing tons of money into it because it will be very profitable for them. So I think that's an important thing to remember, is communities hold a lot of power here.
We are under a minute, and so I just want to thank you, Michael, for coming and presenting. It was very insightful. I think if we, amongst the team who have joined here, if there are any remaining questions, type them out, and we will we'll be able to exchange that. But like, moving forward, we need to understand what exactly as a community we're asking out of you.
Totally.
Okay.
It was great to meet you all.
Thank you for your
You're doing
time.
great work.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.